Hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. We will get started in just a moment. And we are a full crowd today. It's wonderful to be together. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here. We're going to get started. We are a full crowd coming in from all across the U.S. So please do us a favor. We're not going to go around the room as we often try to do with these types of webinars and programs, but please in the chat, do introduce yourself, share your name, your pronouns, if you would like, what organization you are coming from, and the location across the US that you're Zooming in from. We will save this information. Please do see who each other is and feel free to connect via the chat as well. You will see in the room, we also have a number of Adamah staff. We are so glad that you are here. Bruce Spearer works with the coalition team, and so the coalition members in the room will be very familiar with his face and name. And we also have Ari coming in from the Detroit team, who does incredible work on the ground in Detroit. So thank you so much for being here. So I generally come from San Francisco on unceded Ohlone land, and I have just touched down in New York City. My wardrobe has definitely changed. I'm very happy to have gone from the cold fog to the summer of New York City. And I'm indeed grateful that I made it here this week. Back from the West Coast, I watched as the forecast and the air quality changed drastically on the East Coast across the entire seaboard and then some. And it was with much too familiarity that I saw the AQIs change, and it caused pause and sadness around the climate disasters that we're experiencing. But with that sadness, I knew that we had this webinar happening where so many of us are curious and excited to engage on climate action. So paneling that sadness that we're experiencing to this question about what we can do. So I'm so grateful that we are here to talk about not just the realities of climate change, but gathering around the question of what we can do. So here we are. I am honored to be here on behalf of Adamah, the largest leading Jewish environmental organization, to be hosting this conversation about a critical investment from the US government towards climate action. And thank you, Bruce, for doing this slides. I'm ready for the next one. Yes, so thank you. I see that question popping in. I won't be able to be in the chat, so do feel free just to pause me. This webinar is indeed about the federal government program, Renew America's nonprofits that can fund energy efficiency. So not only does that grant through energy efficiency reduce the cost of electricity and all utilities around, but it also is, by reducing our energy use, is a lead conduit to how we can take climate action. So we at Adamah believe in the deep connection between people, planet, Adam and Adamah. And just so to be clear, I'll do a quick introduction, hand it over to some of our lead colleagues at JFNA. I'll get to there, and then we'll have the bulk of this will be around the Renew America's Nonprofits federal program. And we'll get there in just a moment. Every day at Adamah, we inspire and empower people to feel the connection, activate Jewish identity, build inclusive community, and work towards a more sustainable future. Because we are the link between our ancestors and our descendants, and so we feel called to respond to today's crises with the full power of the Jewish spirit. Next, please. So that's where we come in at Adamah. We cultivate vibrant Jewish life and deep connection with the earth, catalyzing culture change and systemic change through Jewish environmental education, climate action, and immersive retreats. We are a national organization with immersive campuses, as well as community impact hubs in major Jewish communities across the country. We have our 2 retreat centers, one at Isabella Freedman in Falls Village, Connecticut, which is a partnership with the UJA Federation New York, and also Pearlstone in Reisterstown, Maryland, which is a partnership with the next one, please. And the Pearlstone Retreat Center is a partnership with the the Federation in Baltimore. Across our programs, we host immersive retreats and signature programs across these campuses that bring our ethos to life. Next. Beyond our community impact hubs, Adamah offers programming to support youth empowerment towards Jewish climate action. And next. Last but not least is the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, an unprecedented Jewish climate mobilization activating the largest umbrella Jewish organizations and their massive networks in order to help hundreds of Jewish communities craft and implement climate action plans. Joining the coalition is free of cost. We ask that you're ready to act. And with this, we will stop our screen share. And highlight that one of those founding partners with us is JFNA, the host, the parent organization, the network umbrella around for the federations across the US and then some. And with us, we have our partner. So Adamah has been working very closely with JFNA and Elon Kramer on doing this work, hosting communities of practice and leading and inspiring the federations across the US in engaging in this work. So I pass it to you, Elon.
Thank you so much, Lior. As Lior mentioned, I'm Elon Kramer, Senior Director of Community Engagement on the Community and Jewish Life team at the Jewish Federations of North America. And JFNA is proud to be a founding member of Adamah's Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, and to collaborate with Adamah in sharing resources and funding opportunities like today's call with the broader federation system. We run, as Lior mentioned, a collaborative community of practice for federations thinking about translating climate action work into their community engagement and Jewish life strategy in a variety of different ways. And so I'd love to encourage and invite any interested federations who are not yet members of the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition who are on this call to join us in this important work, and to please reach out to Lior or myself with any questions about what it might look like for your community to join. I will put my email in the chat to reach out. And with that, I will turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Karen.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see all of you, and I'm happy to see so many federations and our agencies that are participating in this webinar. I just wanted to, my role at JFNA is Public Affairs Associate Vice President of the Public Affairs, and our division was actually very active in lobbying for this grant for the energy, the nonprofit energy grant. And I want everyone to know that we are receiving your feedback about the rollout and about the process, and we are working on that. We're trying to learn more about how it's actually going to be implemented and how the rollout will work using this system of a prime recipient. But it is not ideal, and it wasn't what we envisioned it would be. So we are going to be working in the next few months to see where changes could be made to make the program a little more accessible for everybody based on the feedback that we're receiving from the field. So it's important, I think, today that we learn as much as we can from Adamah and what the plans are with this cycle, this grant cycle that's coming up and that we're in right now. And then we will look to ways to make the system much better for the future. And also the Department of Energy has had webinars, and they have a recording of some of those webinars as well that you can log on to. And they've had office hours, and I think they might have one more office hour coming up. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'll return to Lior to get the program going. Thank you again for everybody for participating and being on this call.
Thank you. And so now to the bulk of the presentation. We are so excited to have Daniel Bressett with us to talk about Renew America's Nonprofits, this unprecedented grant opportunity coming from the federal government. Daniel serves as president of the Environmental and Energy Studies Institute in Washington, D.C., a nonprofit education and policy organization. He comes to us with a wealth of experience advising and leading on energy policy and initiatives. Also with Daniel, though not presenting, is Miguel Yanez Bernuevo. Both have been a tremendous asset to us and countless other nonprofits that are on the ground looking to bring this funding opportunity to our community organizations. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. That was very nice. It's very nice to see everybody today. I'm Dan. While I'll be leading the presentation, Miguel knows an awful lot about this. And so he may be putting in resources in the chat. There may be things that I might miss on a particular slide. And so he may chime in. Our contact information is in the presentation, and we'll make sure that Leora gets the updated version, because I think we made a couple tweaks since we did the original version. You know how these things are, right? No PowerPoint is ever totally set. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get right underway. We have a lot to cover. Hopefully everyone can see that first slide. Is that looking good? All right. No one said it isn't, so I'm just going to go. So again, Environmental and Energy Study Institute, we're based here in Washington. We sort of have two lines of business. The first is our federal policy operation. We provide congressional staff and their bosses, members of Congress, with educational resources about a full range of climate change topics. Next year is our 40th anniversary, so we've been around for some time. More recently, we've developed some expertise working with utilities in rural areas to advance energy efficiency and electrification and other clean energy technologies. And that has given us a wealth of information that when we found out about this grant program and the infrastructure bill, we saw an opportunity to leverage that information in a new way. And so that's led us to really study this program and try to be involved in it. We also hold diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as core values at EESI. And then that last bullet point is our mission and vision. It always, I think, helps to start with sort of the bottom line, and that is energy efficiency is always a good thing. Solar energy is great, wind energy is great, storage is great, electric vehicles is great. Always, energy efficiency is a great thing. It's always the place you want to start. And so we're really pleased to see the Department of Energy leading with the Renew America's Nonprofits program. This program came out of the infrastructure bill that was signed into law almost 2 years ago. So we've been working on this for a while and tracking it. Just a good reminder of the time scale we're talking about when dealing with the Department of Energy. It's often measured in years, not months. Energy efficiency is a good thing because it saves previously wasted energy. And as someone who runs a nonprofit, I know that there are only so many places I can cut costs. And I'm always looking for resources to invest in the core mission, and energy efficiency is an opportunity to do that. It also improves the sustainability and productivity of our facilities for religious organizations, important members of their communities. It contributes to community health, wellness, and resilience. So that's a good example. It also increases readiness for all of those other clean energy technologies. An efficient building, an efficient facility is a better starting point than an inefficient one. And of course, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to fight climate change as it happens. So in November 2021, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, depending on how you talk about it. Part of that was a little tiny program, little tiny provision called, at that time, Energy Efficiency Materials Pilot Project. Now it's called Renew America's Nonprofits, and it provides competitive grants to energy efficiency, what they call materials, in nonprofit buildings. One thing that sort of is sort of obvious as we go through the presentation is we're talking about like a single page of bill text in a $1.2 trillion bill, $550 billion of new spending in the infrastructure bill. It was one page, basically the nonprofits program. Now we're talking about a funding opportunity announcement that's many dozens of pages, scores of pages. So as the program has been developed, the Department of Energy has been putting a lot of time and effort into thinking about how this can be effectively implemented from their perspective, but also the perspective of applicants. But the statute provides some really basic information that hasn't changed. And the first is what a nonprofit building means, and that is a building that's owned and operated by a 501c3. So while today we're talking about facilities owned by religious organizations, the entire nonprofit sector is actually the target for the program, and that's an extremely diverse and large sector. We know what an energy efficiency material is. That sort of term of art has been sort of changed over since we've moved from sort of that single page of bill text to notice of intent. to now funding opportunity announcement, but we're talking about things that save energy. So things that reduce energy consumption in buildings. They list a bunch of examples that I've listed here, but it doesn't include things like wind. It doesn't include things like solar. It doesn't include things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we really are talking about facility improvements that reduced energy consumption on site. And is also the source for how the applications will be evaluated. We've learned more about how the Department of Energy sees those things, but essentially it's the energy savings achieved, the cost effectiveness of the measures, a plan for evaluation, measurement, verification, alignment with Justice 40, and then the financial need of the organization. And Miguel, if I forget anything, he'll just have to interrupt me. Yeah, he doesn't always like to interrupt me, but he has permission today. So here's the program structure. This came up, Karen, I think, was just mentioning this. So we didn't know exactly what the program structure was going to look like until we saw the notice of intent that came out in April. And basically, the Department of Energy has opted to pursue what they call an aggregate model or an aggregation model. And that means that the applications themselves will be assembled and submitted by prime recipients. And prime recipients are 501c3 organizations that meet these criteria. This is, it shifts a lot of the sort of the burden from the department to the prime recipients, makes the prime recipients a really important player in all of this. But it actually works much closer with how the Department of Energy usually makes grants. There's often a prime recipient and a series of subrecipients or contractors and partners and vendors and things like that. It's, I think, probably a lot closer to how their procurement model is designed to work than making hundreds or evaluating potentially thousands of applications and making dozens and dozens of individual grants to community-based organizations, nonprofits. Underneath the prime recipients, you find the subrecipients. These are organizations that generally own and operate their own buildings. That's really important. ESI is a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, but we don't own or operate our own building. We lease space, so we're just not eligible, even if we wanted to take an advantage of the grant. It's important that the subrecipients benefit engage with what are called disadvantaged communities. That's a term of art, but often there are other sort of that encompasses a lot of different types of communities, and also leverages sources from other funds, and those other sources of funds can come from all over the place. The partner is sort of the other sort of named party in all of this, and they're organizations that support and complement the prime recipients, and they have a bunch of potential roles in the application and ultimately in project implementation. Partners don't need to be 501c3s. They could be, for example, financial institutions, state and local governments, utilities, energy service providers, and others. But the prime recipient is really targeted at those 501c3s. And then ultimately, the projects themselves have to take place in buildings that are owned and operated by 501c3s. I'm trying to keep up with the chat, just making sure that I don't miss anything. And we're moving pretty swiftly because I want to get this out there, and then we can have time for Q&A, and the slides and the presentation will be made available. So there's some other details that I just wanted to share. One, Congress provided $50 million, and of that $50 million, $45 million will be made available for total awards. The other $5 million will be used by the Department of Energy to implement the program. We think, based on what the department has said in writing and on the webinars that have happened so far, is that they're looking to make grants to prime recipients worth between $3 and $9 million. And then the subgrants are capped by statute at $200,000 a piece. So you can fit a lot of $200,000 grants in a $9 million award, and that's kind of what they're looking for, to, I think, minimize the number of prime recipients they have to deal with, but also ensuring that they get as many grants out and impact as many communities as possible. We're looking at performance periods of between 36 and 48 months. We'll talk a little bit more about the time frame in just a moment. They anticipate between 5 and 15 prime recipients. That will depend on the amount of the awards, and also it'll depend on how many they overall receive, I think. And there is a cost share. So normally the default cost share for these types of programs is 50%. One of the big things we emphasized in our comments to the department back in December was that the cost share should be as close to zero as possible. They settled at 20%. But this is something that's done at the portfolio level. And so the prime recipient ultimately is responsible for assembling resources that make up that 20% cost share. So we would have liked to have seen that be a little bit lower, but cost share is typically required, and 20% is a lot better than 50%. There may be other questions. So Miguel and I do not work for the federal government. We're not Department of Energy employees, but we are studying this. And if you are having a hard time getting questions answered, I hope you'll feel free to reach out to us. There are Q&As, FAQs, at-a-glance guides, all sorts of additional resources available at DOE, in addition to the webinars and the office hours. But if we can be a resource, I hope you'll take advantage of it. So the timeline. So where we are in the process. So the infrastructure bill was enacted in November 2021. We first started getting wind of this program and how it was coming together in early 2022. Most of last year was spent getting the word out to nonprofits about the benefits of energy efficiency. And then things started to get real. We started last fall to really start. We started detecting a lot of activity in the department. And at the beginning of the year, we started seeing notices and hearing pronouncements that the program would be implemented or opened for applications sometime in summer 2023. There was a notice of intent that was issued in April, and then that was built upon by the funding opportunity announcement that came out on May 24th, I think. So it's actually still pretty new. The timeline that we're looking at now is like someone mentioned, there have been two webinars, one on June 6th and June 8th. That's great. There will be two office hours opportunities for people to ask questions. And that will be June 22nd, which I think is next Friday or next Thursday, and then July 13th. Those are 1 p.m. Eastern. There is an optional letter of intent stage. So prime recipients have the option of submitting a letter of intent that provides a high-level overview of what they're proposing to do. Those are due on June 29th. Submission deadline for applications is August 3rd. And then we start to think about, okay, well, when do we hear? The Department of Energy thinks that early October is when notifications will start going out. There will be some period of time before negotiations begin. Negotiations is not, I mean, that's the word. There is a process for procurement, what they call it at the Department of Energy. And there is some significant back and forth. I think that's one reason why they went the prime recipient route, is to be able to deal with organizations that could kind of keep up with that procurement process. That will take time. My guess is that we're probably, maybe 12 months or so from when projects are really getting underway. So, probably second quarter of 2024 is when the first projects will start happening. We'll have a 2-page fact sheet that kind of is an overview of the FOA out pretty soon. It's in pretty good shape, but it hasn't quite been posted yet, and that will help. The idea is that before the letters of intent are due, that'll be a new resource to help people navigate as they're putting that together and putting the full application together as well. So applications will be reviewed by the Department of Energy according to certain criteria. There are 4, and in the parentheses are the relative weights of the criteria, and these follow pretty closely a combination of what the statute directed DOE to do, and also how DOE typically reviews applications for these sorts of things. So the first is the project team and program plan. This is the approach, the prime recipient, their ability to provide technical assistance, who's involved, the experience of those involved, the plan for evaluation, measurement, and verification. All of that adds up to about 40% of the total. Number 2 is energy-related impacts of the portfolios. So the portfolios are an aggregation of many projects in perhaps many buildings. They're looking for energy savings, they're looking for cost savings, they're looking for emissions reductions, and they're looking for cost effectiveness. So while energy efficiency is always good, there are energy efficiency measures that are more cost effective than others. But generally, you get to their optimum cost effectiveness by having larger, more scoped out projects. Energy efficiency typically begets more energy efficiency and more savings. The third criteria is leverage and sustainability. Department of Energy, I think, sees this as a pilot program. They would like it to be marvelously successful. And one of the ways that you measure success is by how many other dollars it deploys to having these projects completed. And so they're looking for Other sources, the ability of prime recipients, the ability of subrecipients to marshal resources from other sources like utility programs or financing, things like that, so that they can basically leverage the $45 million into something much, much bigger. And then recognizing the important role that nonprofits play in their communities, the ability for these projects to produce enduring impact and make a long-term benefit community. The last criteria is what they call the community benefits plan. This has a couple different components, but two of the big ones are: one, alignment with Justice 40. Justice 40 is the administration's environmental justice directive. It comes from an executive order that President Biden signed into effect, early in his administration. There's a lot of information coming up on some future slides about Justice 40. If you haven't already taken a look at it, I definitely recommend that you do that. It will be my hunch is that the community benefits plan will be what really separates a lot of the applications. And so being familiar with Justice 40 is and the different tools to evaluate your alignment with Justice 40 is a good idea. And then community engagement and job quality. Energy efficiency jobs are local jobs, and the department would like as many local clean energy jobs as possible. And so that is an element that they're going to be looking for as well. A competitive application. This is the funding opportunity announcement provides a lot more information about this. But in general, they're looking for certain elements to pop in the application. And the first is the narrative and the resumes. There's a page limit. But they're looking for the approach. They're looking for the prime recipient to basically demonstrate that they can get this done, and they can get it done in a way that makes sense, and that they'll be bringing together a team of organizations or partners that can ultimately ensure success. They're looking for the community benefits plan. This is going to, largely around accountability and setting goals. They will want to know sort of which communities will be impacted and how they'll be impacted and for how long, and where the different benefits are realized. And then there is a whole bunch of red tape, letters of commitment, the 990 of the organizations, budget justifications, federal assistance application. It's a pretty long table. There's a lot of stuff that they're looking for. And of course, all of it by August 3rd. One thing, if you haven't already done this yet, even if you are still unsure if you will be a prime recipient or a subrecipient or a partner, applicants really should register at DOE Exchange, FedConnect, SAM.gov, and grants.gov. I think it's generally a good idea to do it in that order. These registrations don't take a lot of time, but sometimes they can take some time to process. And so you wouldn't want to not have a SAM registration, for example, on August 2nd. That would be a good thing. And if you read the FOA closely, they actually recommend getting things in early to help us. The letter of intent, I think they're like, yeah, it's, there's the deadline, but it's really good if you get it in 48 hours early. So definitely get started on those registrations if you haven't already yet. And many of you may already have those, I'm not sure. So since the very beginning, when Miguel and I started doing these webinars and when we first met Leor and Rachel and others, we have been making certain recommendations to help nonprofits prepare for the moment. And this is largely the same list, but benchmarking the understanding of a nonprofit of how energy is consumed in their facilities is really, really important. If you haven't already started on that, it's not too late, but it's a good thing to get started on. Benchmarking starts with just a catalog of the energy consuming equipment in your facilities. Doesn't have to be complicated, but you have to know where you're starting from. And that is really critical for benchmarking. And benchmarking is important not just for scoping out the project, but it's also really important for the evaluation, measurement, and verification plan. Understanding how you're doing will lead to better results when you're thinking about how to measure progress and how to evaluate that progress. And DOE will have reporting requirements, I'm pretty sure. So thinking about benchmarking throughout the project in the form of evaluation, measurement, and verification is another wise place to start. And then defining success, ensuring that people across your organization who may be involved in decision-making are fully bought in so that you don't get close to the application deadline and someone's like, well, actually, you don't have those internal resources maybe you thought you did for leverage purposes, or actually this piece of property is tied up in some covenant somewhere and you're not going to be able to make the improvement, or historic preservation is an issue. Making sure that you understand what a successful project looks like and who is actually going to be involved in that and what steps are really, really important to be doing at this time. The leverage is a big one. If you haven't already been in touch with your utilities, that's often a good place to start. State energy offices, can't say enough good things about state energy offices. They also may be able to help you point in the direction, or be pointed in the direction of additional resources. Auditing. Now this is something that prime recipients will be involved in, but ultimately the facilities themselves are not the prime recipients' facilities. So, but still understanding scopes of work and what cost effectiveness looks like is a pretty big part of the evaluation. And we've been, Miguel in particular has been documenting a lot of nonprofit success stories of how energy efficiency projects have come together. And so I definitely recommend taking a look at those. There's a lot of great resources, and you might see yourselves in some of these organizations, and some of their stories might resonate with you. And those are always free and available at our website. These are, and again, when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on all of these links. The first batch is some ESI resources, but then we also compiled some DOE resources, that Justice 40 Disadvantaged Community Screening Tool, the Energy Communities Map, the application forms and benefits, and links to the different registration sites are all really good resources to have. And then we also are covering incentives more broadly than just Renew America's Nonprofits. You might have heard there was a big announcement yesterday around direct pay or elective pay for tax incentives, not in the scope of Renew America's Nonprofits, but a good thing generally to be aware of, because it could potentially be a source of leverage, and it may also represent, whatever phase of investment you're thinking about after the energy efficiency project is implemented. And we do our best to track that very closely. So that wraps up. I'm way behind in the chat, but happy to take any questions, and we'll make sure that that you all get the updated copy of these slides. The last one is our contact information, and everyone should feel free to be in touch with Miguel and me after today's call or webinar if we can provide any more information.
Thank you, Daniel. I have been attempting to keep an eye on the chat and to get to some answers, but some for you around the 200,000. Is that a limit per subrecipient or per site? So if one organization owns multiple buildings.
That's a good question. The grants themselves capped at $200,000. So I think that would be a subrecipient cap, since the subrecipient is ultimately getting the grant. But I don't know, Miguel, if you disagree with that, but I would think about it as a subrecipient cap, I think.
I would see it as a per facility.
Oh, okay.
The 4 talks all about facilities and buildings, so I would understand it as a 200,000 per facility.
So the FOA is chocked full of contradictions and confusing language. If you have that question, that would be one maybe to submit to the Department of Energy. They're keeping it a frequently asked questions. The program has changed, right? When it was just an individual application, one per nonprofit, the $200,000 applied to both equally because they were one and the same. But yeah, Miguel's probably right. $200,000 per facility. Now, if you have a campus and you have maybe a worship facility, and then you maybe have an athletic facility, or maybe you have a conference center, is the Department of Energy going to consider each one of those for up to $200,000? I think I could start talking myself into no. Actually, they're thinking about the campus. But there are ambiguities in the funding opportunity announcement, and also potentially a good question just to get the clarification by attending those office hours that are coming up next week.
I got a question because I see the dates over here, and this is going up to 2024 to get an answer. What if I have equipment that need to be changed, let's say next year. And I went ahead and I got a green loan and I changed it. Will the application cover, let's say, I get it, that will be retroactively, or this is only, okay, we approved you, now you can go ahead and do what you asked for?
I wouldn't plan on if you have a project that you know needs to be scheduled for a particular time, given the timing and the competitiveness of the program, probably would make sense to just go ahead and get that project done. Department of Energy typically doesn't deal with things in arrears. So for example, all of the work that whoever is putting in, all the work on the prime recipients to submit an application, for example, that's not covered by the grant. If there was a project that was completed outside the scope of the negotiation and the performance period, I wouldn't expect the Department of Energy to reimburse for that. I think they're looking for projects that start when the recipient gets or subrecipient gets the money and then is completed over the course of the performance period. I think it would be pretty unusual for them to accept a project that happened outside the performance period.
Dan, if you want to go ahead and stop screen sharing, we may be able to see one another.
Sure.
Thank you. Another interesting question is the 20% cost share requirement for prime recipients or subrecipients?
So the cost share is something that happens at the prime recipients level, so it's portfolio wide. There are probably, well, I mean, I think the FOIA describes that at the portfolio level. There are reasons for that potentially. Not every not every subrecipient will have access to the same have the same access to resources. And so the prime recipient might be able to kind of smooth that out at the portfolio level and sort of assemble sort of an optimum portfolio. That's part of the reason why I think they do it that way. Also, the prime recipient is the applicant, and the applicant is generally on the hook for the cost share. And so, yeah, but it's, I mean, the subrecipients, my guess, will be called upon to leverage other resources that will then funnel up or be funneled up into the prime recipient application. But ultimately, it's something that is at the portfolio level.
Thank you. Do you see subrecipients choosing prime recipients based on geographic proximity or by service type?
I mean, I think it can go either way. The teaming list, has a lot of organizations already in it, and I think that list will grow. In the notice of intent, the Department of Energy offered a couple examples of what they were looking for. Some of those were geography based. So, a prime recipient in a given geography assembles a portfolio from, around its community. I definitely think that's one way you could go. If you had, a large national group or regional group that had the ability to serve as a prime recipient, and they selected projects from across the geography they serve. So maybe more like organizations. I could definitely see that, but I don't know that there'll be any advantage to doing it either way. It's geographic diverse. Yeah, I think it was probably something that would be communicated in the approach section of the application, the teaming capabilities portion of the application, but whatever delivers the most cost-effective portfolio is probably closer to the right answer.
Thank you. A question if you can talk a little bit more about the disadvantaged population requirement.
So the infrastructure bill was enacted without sort of specific Justice 40 requirements. That's in contrast to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was enacted last August. But everything the administration is doing is attempting to bring things into alignment with Justice 40, because it is sort of a high level, important sort of priority of the administration to advance environmental justice. These are there's something called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and these are census tracts that are overburdened and underserved, is how they word it. And those are what they highlight as being disadvantaged. Federally recognized tribes and Alaska native villages also count in that. So you can zoom in to your community and identify where in your community those disadvantaged boundaries lay. But they're really, Justice 40 is all about delivering benefits and ensuring that people who live in disadvantaged communities realize the benefits. The 40 comes from 40%. So they're looking to ensure that at least 40% of these resources benefit or the communities either benefit from or realize the benefits directly. There's different ways you can say it, but that 40% of these benefits are accrued in these disadvantaged communities. And yeah, that's exactly the screening tool right there. Miguel just popped it in the chat.
Thank you, Miguel. One of my favorites from the coalition perspective that's aims for supporting getting off fossil fuels entirely would the grant cover converting from HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning from gas to electric, or older gas to a higher efficiency gas.
Yeah, so the idea of moving from fossil fuel combustion to electric is it's energy efficiency. Moving from a furnace to a heat pump is generally speaking it's generally speaking a cost-effective improvement to make. So yeah, 100%. Now there are things like that are already electrified. So like lighting systems, there aren't that many fossil fuel powered lighting systems in the United States at this point, but moving from electric to more efficient electric or moving from fossil fuels to more efficient electric, the key is more efficient. The old prime recipients and sub-recipients will be challenged to document the energy savings. They'll have to make sure that gets communicated, that installing this heat pump is an efficiency opportunity. It will reduce energy consumption, save money, hit all of those boxes. But I think in general, there's no problem doing that. Moving from inefficient gas-fired to more efficient gas-fired, I think that may be where you run into some problems. Miguel, I don't know if the FOA specifically addresses this, but I've heard this in context of other federal programs. They're not really looking for opportunities to invest in combustion technologies. They're looking for energy efficient technologies, but there are some things that are really hard to electrify. And depending on the age of the system, the age of the piece of equipment, you might deliver a lot of savings. But Miguel, I don't know, is there specific address of the fossil fuel issue in the FOA?
They generally mention that fuel switching is allowable, and that heat pumps are allowable, and of course geothermals are allowable. They don't mention anything else about gas going from a non-efficient gas to more efficient. So mostly we would encourage, if you're thinking to be more energy efficient, to go from gas furnace to a heat pump or geothermal, which is also eligible for direct pay.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's a good point. Then some technologies like geothermal, for example, that are sort of both renewable and energy efficiency, because you're replacing something inefficient with something that's extremely efficient. It just happens that the energy source is a renewable one. So that's something that we've gotten questions about as well. And geothermal is potentially a good option.
An interesting question about eligible expenses as well, which is, broadly speaking, the electrical work required to I would say twofold. The electrical work required for energy efficiency projects, let's just say fuel pumps and navigating that. And this one particularly is around electrical work for vehicles, for electrifying vehicle fleets or charging.
So the going all the way back to the original statute, they accommodate for what they called wiring and plumbing. So if you're, for example, making a heat pump conversion and your electrical system needs to be upgraded, there may be a wire, maybe there's a receptacle, maybe there's an electrical panel upgrade that's necessary. I think those would all be competitive things to ask for. Same thing with there may be other, technologies. If you're moving from, a gas water heater, for example, to an electric water heater or a heat pump water heater, there might be different plumbing that's required. The pieces of equipment themselves may not have the same footprint, and they just might not have the same connection points. And so, the plumbing and the wiring necessary for that. I think same thing in cooking equipment. If you're moving from gas cooking equipment to electric cooking equipment, or if you're moving from, something like that, where, oh, I need this new receptacle, I need this new wiring, I need this new electrical panel upgrade. I think the statute's pretty clear that all of those things are involved. Solar, electric vehicle charging, things like that. I don't think those are considered eligible uses. Those are not energy efficiency measures in the same way of what they're looking for. So, wiring and trenching to accommodate electric vehicle supply equipment or solar panels, I think that's a bigger stretch. Also, when you start moving away from things that actually lower energy consumption in the facility, you start to affect the cost effectiveness of the project. And so there's probably a natural point when you might not want to add too much more to the project because you might start suffering on the cost effectiveness side of things.
Thank you. A bunch of questions coming into the chat that I could also help answer, but how to navigate the choice between becoming a prime recipient or seeking out a prime recipient to engage in being a sub.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the magic question. So the prime recipient has a lot to do. And the Department of Energy, I think, is looking for prime recipients that can do what they need to do. And so not every organization can actually make that choice. They're probably almost destined to be one or the other. The subrecipient has to own and operate if you're seeking an application to improve the energy efficiency of a facility that you own and operate, the way the Department of Energy wants you to make the application is through a prime recipient. And being a subrecipient and a prime recipient is not the same thing as, I don't think, as being a prime recipient that assembles a portfolio of projects, however that portfolio comes together. That's where the teaming list comes in. I think it's a really great resource and an important sort of way to get visibility into who's actually thinking about doing this. If there's an organization that, like a national group or regional group that has the ability to kind of pull people together, pull projects together, manage the portfolio, the project management, the reporting, dealing with Davis-Bacon and Buy American, all of the fun things that go along with getting a Department of Energy grant. Those capabilities are not easy to just generate. They're things you either have or you don't, or you don't have, or you have the ability to generate, quickly. And those are not easy to do. So I'm curious who's actually in a position where they could be either competitive as a subrecipient or prime recipient. I feel like it's probably one or the other. It feels to me like there's probably, there are probably fewer instances of organizations that actually have that choice that they have to make. One advantage of being a subrecipient is that you get lumped into a portfolio, you get incorporated into a portfolio. And so if you have a shortcoming in your own application, being part of a portfolio might help you overcome some of those shortcomings by being part, of something bigger. And that's where the prime recipient comes in. The prime recipient wants to assemble a project that's as cost effective as possible, touches as many disadvantaged communities as possible, delivers the energy savings, the emission reductions, and also, I think, can demonstrate that the projects once implemented will have lasting community impact. Those are things for an individual organization, for an individual subrecipient that might have a hard time, checking all of those boxes realistically. And so I think I think that's one advantage of the portfolio approach is that it potentially helps people even out a little bit and sort of bring what they can contribute to the portfolio, and then ideally benefit as one of many projects that gets funded.
One question that I have been wondering about emissions reductions, is there clarity on how to navigate emissions reductions associated with electricity? Knowing that each of our sources are slightly different.
Yes, there are tools for that. EPA has a tool called Avert. That's a pretty good one. Yes, those absolutely exist. Avert basically estimates emissions reductions based on your energy mix, based on where you are geographically and where you draw your electricity from. So yes, there are tools available, and I think Avert is I think the FOA includes links to that. At least we have links to that if anyone needs them.
Thank you. We'll have space for just a couple more questions. One of them asks whether a subrecipient can be part of multiple primes applications.
Yeah, the FOA describes that that people, especially at the letter of intent stage, you're welcome to become sort of part of different things. So I mean, the natural constraint is probably just how much time and effort there is, and how competitive it could be for subrecipients to become part of a portfolio. But yeah, the FOA specifically addresses that point.
I think I'm catching all the questions in the chat. We have time for one or two more questions. And please feel free to take yourself off mute or put it in the chat.
Based on all the information I got here and understanding that, okay, you're not the prime recipient, you're a subrecipient, there is more specific organization that I can turn to submit the information?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the second half of your question.
Meaning, if I know that I'm subrecipient and I want to, compile all the information of the project that I have, so I understood in the beginning that the letter of intent, all the due dates is not really for me, is more for the prime recipient. So then, do you have, or can I find somewhere a list of prime recipient where I can already ask for information that I need to fill in order to join their portfolio?
Yes, so Laura just put something in the chat that I think will help answer your question as well. But yes, that's where the teaming list comes in. So that's an opportunity for organizations to, make it known that they're interested. And I think that's one of the benefits of having a network like this, where everyone's thinking about it. And there may be some natural selection in terms of who becomes a prime recipient and who becomes a subrecipient. But yes, that's something that the Department of Energy has provided a resource. They call it the teaming list to help make that known and help make that information available.
So Daniel, just to clarify, everyone that is interested or even thinking about it should make sure that they apply to put their name on that list, right? That's what you're saying is like the action right now.
I think most people have taken that approach. ESI is not on the teaming list. We don't sort of see, we're not going to be a prime recipient and we're not a subrecipient, and you don't really bring a lot to the table in terms of being a partner. But I think most organizations that have signed up for the teaming list have done so just to make sure that their name is out there. And being on the teaming list doesn't, I think, obligate anyone to do anything. It's more about making people aware that the organization's out there. And I think the reason why the letter of intent is optional is because this is all happening pretty quickly. If you submit a letter of intent, that doesn't mean you have to submit an application. If you do not submit a letter of intent, it doesn't mean you can't submit an application. And the letter of intent is early in the process, or halfway through the process. And so not everything will be totally clear at that point. But yeah, I think the teaming list is a good resource to just sort of get bearings and understand, like, okay, who's out there, who's interested in doing this, and is there potentially a gap in my project team that someone on the teaming list could help fill?
Just want to point out and put on the chat that if you go into the DOE Exchange website and you go into the section about the Renew Americans nonprofit and you scroll down, you can see the teaming list Excel spreadsheet, which is updated every couple of days. and that will download into your computer, and then you can see all the organizations that have identified themselves either as prime recipients or recipients of partners, and it's categorized by name of organization, contact information, how they identify themselves. And so there's more than 1,000 organizations in there. You can scroll through, you can do lots of things, and you can find someone that you can work with, either sub-recipients or prime recipients.
Thank you. I think that with this, we have come to an end of our Q&A. Daniel and Miguel, thank you so much for this presentation and all you've done on the back end to support Adamah and others in our primary recipient application work. For those in the coalition, you are invited to join us in a separate Zoom for office hours based on this. Everybody will be sending a follow-up with a recording and the links and the slide deck from this session. If you are not yet a member of the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, please do consider joining. We are here to support you in doing this work through this grant proposal and beyond. Please review the website, check out the registration link, and there's even an info session coming up on July 13th. Each of you, as we talked about, may also be interested in a webinar we're co-hosting on July 18th with Interfaith Power and Light about direct pay, a new unprecedented federal incentive that finally allows nonprofits a rebate of 30% or more for climate action such as solar. To everyone, thank you for being here, for your interest in doing this work. Your presence here is a clear indication to us, EESI, and by extension, our federal government, that we hear the call and we're ready to take climate action. Thank you very much, and we look forward to doing this important work alongside each of you.